day, viewers, you're welcome to another edition, an episode of this program. My name is Frida Okira, your usual host. Today's program promises to be very, very educative as we are throwing a beam light on the federal government to know how far they've gone in cutting costs. Because one of the major agenda of the federal government is to cut down the cost of governance. Away from that a little, we'll take some news stories. These are some of the stories that are hitting the headline as per now. The federal government spent 105 billion on travels in 2015. The federal government has said it spent 105 billion naira on travels in 2015. The head efficiency unit, Mrs. Patience Oniha, stated this at a workshop on travels discounts.
Look at 2015, for instance, we spent over 105 billion on travels. We know that the exchange rate may have had an impact on that one, but we can't go on like that, so something has to be done. Started the discussions with airlines, so all of them that are allowed to operate in Nigeria by the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority.
However, in a bid to cut down cost of governance, the federal government, in partnership with airlines, has partnered for 50% discounts on travels. The sales manager, Dana Air, Remy Jibodu, confirms this partnership.
For federal inland revenue services, of course, when I say that been set for us, that has a heavy input from FRS itself. It's simply about 4.9
shuttle unit. We have concluded agreement which has been signed already. We are ready to roll out. What we are doing today is just to do public enlightenment and make people to understand what we are doing. We're talking about airfares, but when I talk about 50% discount, I'm talking about the excluding the taxes and surcharges.
The federal government targets 4.9 trillion from tax in 2017, says the FRS boss. The federal government has targeted 4.9 trillion naira from tax in 2017. The executive chairman, Federal Inland Revenue Service, Babatunde Fowler, stated this during a workshop with journalists in Abuja. The representative of the FRS boss, Mr. Femi Faniye, Director Debt Management Department, explained what the FRS is doing to hit its 2017 targets.
The total overall targets that have been set for federal inland revenue services, of course, when I say that has been set for us, that has a heavy input from FRS itself. It's simply about 4.9 trillion naira. One of the key things that the FRS is doing this year is on this issue of ensuring that the tax base which we have been widening, as a matter of fact, about 816,000 new taxpayers were brought into the tax net last year. While we intend to continue that as much people that are not in the tax net are brought in, we now want to emphasize on them making payments. And what has helped advanced countries a lot is technology. So we are investing much in that area to highlight certain of the areas. In telecommunications, we want to ensure that every couple that is paid for airtime, recharge cards and all that, the VAT aspect of it automatically is remitted to the tax authority instead of it remaining with the operators. We also like to mention one or two other areas which are in terms of debt and then strengthening our audit. What I mean by debt is there are so many of our taxpayers who owe us established amounts that are not paid, very huge sums in some certain sectors. And if you remember, we went into an amnesty program towards the end of last year, whereby we encouraged debtors to come forward to bring up a plan, and if it's acceptable, we waived penalty and interest for them. As a matter of fact, like you heard in my presentation, we generated over 27 billion through that process. But now the continuance with compliance with whatever plan has been laid down is key for us to monitor and focus to ensure that they keep on paying, and I know we can realize a lot from there. And finally, we are strengthening our audit processes. Since the coming on board of the current administration of Mr. Tunde Fowler, a lot of revolution in that area of audit has occurred, given the fact that it was perceived that our audit process was not the very best that we could get in terms of quality before it came. But now it has been revolutionized, and a lot of changes that is making the process to be more qualitative and to deliver the expected result.
Yeah, back to our topic of discussion for today, cutting cost of governance. One of the things, at least you got from that information, the news story, is that over 105 billion naira spent on travels yearly. That's huge. That money can tar the road from Lokoja that has never been completed since it started to Abuja. It can fix a lot of things. Our railway, it can do a lot. So far, at the course of my interview with Mrs. Patience Oniha, the head efficiency unit, she told me that, and she will be talking to you as well, that 10 billion has been saved every year from that cost of travels, which was about 105, and it's saving up to 10 million. We are still asking, and we still demand that she does better than that. She could save half of that money to save up to 50 billion. It's doable, and we are trusting in her. Well, the federal government established this department for this purpose. We will not take much on this. I will just go straight to the interview. Mrs. Patience Oniha, the head efficiency unit of Ministry of Finance. Stay tuned. Finance, where I am with the director efficiency unit, who is Mrs. Patience Oniha. This unit particularly was established November 2015 to help the country cut down the cost of governance, and the head of this department is Mrs. Patience Oniha. Ma, you're welcome to this program.
Thank you.
Since November 2015, the department has been working very hard, releasing circulars on how to cut down the cost of governance in several segments. We want to know to what extent have you been able to cut down, to what amount have you been able to cut down the cost of governance, especially in the last 1 year.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'll just provide some context to it and then answer your questions directly. The first part is we were created essentially to reduce the cost of governance in relation to overhead expenditure. Okay, we know what the components of the annual budget are. So overhead expenditure technically is part of that recurrent expenditure that covers travels, trainings, stationery, and all the likes. So that essentially is the scope of our mandate. But a component was also added to it that relates to procurement, as in how can we do better on procurement. Don't forget, our mandate is about eliminating wastages and leakages and promoting value for money in government spending, meaning for every naira, or as my minister will say, every kobo spent, I meant we got value for it. Not so it's not strictly as in related to circulars alone. It's that mandate that we're working with. And let me say that what we first did before you embark on an assignment and begin to determine how to address the issues which have to do with wastages, leakages, and procurement, you study what is on ground first. Okay, so we spent I think the first few weeks, less than a month, looking at what was on ground, looking at what the various practices and policies were. And after that, we were able to come up with strategies. So I'm happy you talked about circular. That is, how would I say, one that is very familiar and has been in the public domain. But essentially what we did is look at the various overhead expenditure lines. Some are similar in terms of how they're incurred or how you can manage them. Some are not, so we couldn't apply a blanket rule in terms of how to manage them. So circular is not the way to address all of them. So we came up with what would be a 4-point strategy for how to manage costs on overhead expenditure as well as procurement, what we can do on procurement. So the first one, and I will start with that because that was your first choice. As a government, there are things you can do administratively. Administratively means you don't need a third party, you don't need to hire a consultant, you don't need also to go to the National Assembly to pass a law. Within yourself as if I may say, the executive arm of government, the civil service, the public service, there are things you can do. Okay, so that is where circulars come in. We know that government MDAs operate on the basis of regulations, circulars. So there were some items that could be managed by circular. What does a circular do? A circular speaks to specific issues. It tells you this is how to go about it, this is approved, this is what the limit, and even before you incur that limit, this is how to go about it. So the circulars essentially are guidelines. What we discovered in looking at some expenditure items were that there were really no circulars that says this is what you should do, and we know that where there's no rule, it then means we would apply discretion. Discretion means somebody may be very generous, somebody may be more moderate, but overall we're talking about eliminating wastages and leakages and saving money for government. And so we asked the relevant offices to issue circulars that are technically guidelines on some of those expenditure items, and we asked for circulars. So there are basically two offices by law. By the law of the government is the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation and the Office of the Head of the Civil Service of the Federation. So we approached them with a number of items that we had reviewed. So the first thing was to review the figures, then review the practices. How do MDAs do this? Is there any policy around it? So we made recommendations to them, and thankfully a number of those have been introduced. So the first one is to introduce controls and limits. This is how much we can spend. The other component is to make it uniform across MDAs. Okay, so in some MDAs this is the practice, in another MDA it is the other practice. So we felt since we're government, it should be standard, whether you're in Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Health, or you are in one agency or the other, the same rules should apply. Is that correct? Okay, so far we've had 6 circulars that have been issued. Okay, you will be familiar with the circular on travels. I think there was some recent media issues around that one. Circulars on travel. So both the Secretary to the Government of the Federation and the Head of Service issued circulars on that. It has various components. The one that is much talked about is the fact that the circular says public officials can't travel first class. If you're familiar with travels, especially the international ones, the difference between first class and business class is huge, and between business class and economy is huge. So we're not talking about saving 100,000 or even 500,000 naira one way. It's huge. The difference is huge on those when you move up to those 2 classes. So the circulars issued by the 2 of them say so. So the one by the Secretary to the Government, obviously, as you know, applies to agencies as well. Okay, so that took out first class. The second thing we did was even business class. Not everybody can travel business class. Again, so we reduced first class. We reduced the number of persons that can do business class, and in the circulars it is expressly stated who it is who can travel business class. Okay, so it's not a case of judgment and sentiments. Okay, and then the other component, which is not talked about too often, is basically that circular also says travel has to be essential. Okay, closely related to that is the one issued by the Head of Service on training that says for foreign training, there's a travel component to it. Foreign training will only be allowed if the course organizer or person extending the invitation is going to bear the full cost, including travel. Okay, the implication of those circulars, the 2 circulars issued by them, in total is about 10 billion of savings per annum to government. Like I said, the difference between business and first class is huge. So that savings is about 10 billion. But let me not skip a component of the circular issued by the Secretary to the government. Some of the things you see, you will see that we are all resident here in Abuja, but we decide we want to go to Lagos for a meeting, all of us, or we're going to London for a meeting. So what we are saying is the government cannot afford that. Was that the right practice before? The answer is really no. And we can see the effect on our facilities, infrastructure. We spent money on other things that didn't have long-term benefits and impact on people's lives. So that circular did say from the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, MDAs and committees, you know there are some federal government committees, should have their meetings and other activities where their assignment is. And if they have to travel abroad, we know that some boards of agencies would sometimes travel abroad for a workshop. They should seek the approval of his office. That means it has to be very, very, very necessary, isn't it? So that's what we've done on travel. There's a circular on sitting allowance, and essentially what we're saying is the government was paying sitting allowance 8 times a year. Sitting allowance relates to meetings of committees, of boards, of agencies, and parastatals. Government was paying sitting allowance 8 times a year. Okay, the first thing is to say, meaning that's the maximum allowed. And as you would know, human beings are prone to, if it's allowed 8 times, then we sit 8 times, even if we don't really need to sit, but the allowance is there. And I like to emphasize that when you have those meetings, it's not only the sitting allowance. As you know, there will be travel. There will be arrangements for hotel, for Esther code or patio. There will be several cars, logistics, and meals and refreshments. So the cost is heavy when you have those physical meetings. So we said we should adopt best practice, maximum of 4 times a year. If there's a reason for any other meeting, we know ICT can take care of such things. You can have conference calls, you can have video calls if they're important. So that took care. On that one, we estimate about 1 billion of savings per annum. The other areas where the government has issued circulars, they issued circulars on souvenirs, invitations, brochures. You know, for everything we have, we tend to print. So you have this function, a program that ordinarily, where cost is given the attention it deserves, is a 1-page document. The invitation is also simple. If you see the invitations from some offices, especially some diplomatic offices here, it's basically a white simple card with one color on it printed, so nothing much. So we spend a lot of money on those things. And as you can see on my desk, I have so many publications of agencies. Some of them are not. I went for a function recently and I got last year, and I was given a publication from 2013 or something, which is really not. They were giving it to people. That meant really so much had been printed and had to be given out. So we spend a lot of money on those. So invitation is one. Folders, conference, governors will tend to have several workshops and seminars. So we had a circular issued on that one, prescribing standards for how we should go about it. The other one we had recently also was on meals and refreshments, which was issued in February. That is one of those that we did quite some extensive work on and discovered the rules were different. I mean, MDA spent monies on those, and like I always say, you can say how much is 5,000 for lunch. Really, the issue is Apart from that 5,000, there are several things that are then added onto it. Maybe it should be for 10 people. We then make provision for 20 people or thereabout. So we've introduced standards, and where we're going really is that if we don't fix infrastructure consciously, we keep spending as we used to, we'll be exactly where we are today. So in summary, those are the circulars that have been issued. We still have a number pending with the head of service, and we expect those to be issued over time. We're still following up. As they study it, they then decide what to do. But we follow up very closely. So those are circulars. I think I heard you talk about implementation. As you know, the audit is an important area where the Honorable Minister is looking at. The ministries or MDAs are structured in such a way that audit should go on the same way it happens in the private sector. So there's always an internal auditor, and in some big institutions, there's even an auditor from big MDAs. There's an auditor from the Office of the Auditor General in addition to many resident, okay? And then some have anti-corruption officers. There was a decision some time ago that they should have some of those people resident so they can pick all of those. So ordinarily those should make sure that the system works. And some agencies, for God's sake, as you know, actually have external auditors, just like the private sector has external auditors. Whoever those are, whether it's PricewaterhouseCoopers or KPMG, they have those auditors, or the very many Nigerian firms, audit firms that are duly, registered to carry audit business. So what is wrong? If that process is not working, what is the issue? Why are we not complying? Because the public service does have several circulars and regulations. Why are we not complying? What we have asked to be issued are those ones where there are no circulars. Somewhere there are, but they are not current. Again, we make recommendations, amend this way. Okay. So why is that their issue? So what the Honourable Minister is doing with audit, because audit is the control function. The person that is approving or spending is not the auditor. There should be, you talk about checks and balances. So that is the check that you say, this thing was sent to the office, it's not right, is it in line with policy? For instance, a simple one, if a government official approves a first-class travel for somebody, by the time he goes through the layers, which is internal audit or even finance and accounts, and I've seen that happen, it should be sent back, sorry, this circular says not allowed, and that officer saying that circular would comply. Okay, but the rules seem to have broken. Maybe for some there also is no awareness. So there's, the minister is looking closely at what to do about audit. You've seen what happened with some of those MDAs, agencies rather, that their books were looked at. Okay, so that is some form of audit. But the presidential initiative on continuous assessment is more like another level of audit. So what we expect is when they go to look at the expenditures, their mandate also includes revenue to make sure all the revenues due to government come. They should look at travel, for instance, and say, what was the frequency, how did they travel? So I think it's a question of time. We need to build it into our culture and know that it all works for the entire system for Nigeria. That's all I need to add. On meals and refreshments, we estimate very conservatively that the savings on that one is about 1 billion per annum, but in reality it could be much higher. Continue also. So administrative tools is just one, which is circulars. The other things we're doing, like I said, our mandate is twofold. On that bit about eliminating wastages and leakages, we're working with the with stakeholders, critical stakeholders. Don't forget, ours is to work with relevant institutions that are empowered by law to buy what we're saying. Obviously, they too would look at it and analyze an issue. So one area where we noticed leakages is in the use of cash advance and interest.
That was Mrs. Patience Oniha, the head efficiency unit of the Federal Ministry of Finance. This is all we could take as regards that interview. And she said a couple of things, how over 15 billion had been caused from different sector, feeding, travels and all that. These are the things the federal government is doing. It's just a highlight, just a touchlight of what they are doing. And if you want to get in touch with me, you want to be part of this program, my WhatsApp number is on the screen. Please send me a WhatsApp message. You can contribute whatever you want to contribute to this program. Remember, the program is about current issues that affect you as an individual. And from me and the current crew here, we say thank you for joining us. My name is Frida Okirie. I'll see you next week.